Hey everyone, welcome to PC Perspective. It's been a busy couple of weeks here at the website as the new consoles are launching, and with it comes the consistent and perpetual debate of PC versus consoles for gaming. Right? Obviously, being a PC Perspective website, you know where our hearts lie, although we do love to discuss the console technology and kind of what they offer that's unique and different. An article went up on our website just this week discussing what are the hardware platform diffences between the PS4, the Xbox One, and a typical gaming PC? And we actually built two demo PCs, one at about $550 and one at about $780, to demonstrate what benefits the PC offers and where it might even fall behind some if you're not willing to spend the extra money. Today what we've done is we've gathered a close proximity to the components that we used in our $780 gaming PC build in that story, and we're going to show you how to put it together, that you can absolutely build a PC. It's very simple to do, that installing Windows is easy, getting Steam up and running and downloading games is just as easy on a PC, if not easier, than on your modern consoles. Again, the components here are not exactly the same as what we picked in the article, but they're close enough, and we'll kind of go through all of those as we install them and talk about the differences. We have our Corsair 200R case right here. It's obviously quite a bit bigger than an Xbox One or a PS4, but this will help us demonstrate how to build a system. You can build them much smaller than this, but this gives you room. If you're a first-time builder, having a little bit of extra space inside your computer is definitely very helpful. We also have a power supply here. This is actually an Antec power supply, but it's equivalent, maybe a little bit higher power than the Corsair we offered in our system build. We have an AMD motherboard here. This is actually an Asus A99FX, so it's a 990FX chipset motherboard. Again, a higher end option than we chose in our build in order to maintain lower costs, but same form factor, same processor installation methodology. We have our AMD FX 6300 processor here with retail packaging we'll walk through. We've got a 1 terabyte hard drive. This is a Western Digital instead of a Seagate. Again, the same thing. We have our 8 gigabytes of Corsair memory that we'll talk about. We have a Radeon R9 270X graphics card. This is actually a reference card, though we did recommend a gigabyte card. We have our optical drive, and we have thermal paste if we need it, although I think we'll end up using the retail grouping here. We don't have the copy of Windows sitting out with here. We've got a USB installer we'll show you when we get to that point. So let's go ahead and dive in. Again, for people that have never built a PC before, we'll kind of walk through the specifics of building on this configuration and talk about some of the little catches and things that you may not know or need to look out for while you're building a system. And for me, when I'm building a PC, it's a very individual experience. A lot of people do things differently. I like to configure the motherboard, processor, and memory first before getting anything involved with the case. So let's go ahead and get this out of the way, and we'll bring out the motherboard and processor. So we've laid out our processor, memory, and motherboard here. We're going to go ahead and unbox them and kind of demonstrate the process. Usually your memory will come in a blister pack. This did not, because we happened to take some that was still sitting around. We've got our retail processor here. So we'll go ahead and open that up and show you what you get inside the box with that. You got some instructions there, lots of different options for how to install processors. This is a pretty generic guide. Toss that out of the way. So here you actually have the AMD FX 6300 processor. You've got a case badge if you're still into putting those on your system. So keep that in its little protective case for now. And we've got a pretty generic stock heatsink. These are not the best quality, but they will get you by. They're not the most efficient. They're not the most effective. They're not the quietest. But for getting a budget system build, this is a fine option for the 100-watt TDP of this particular processor. You can see this already has some thermal material applied to the base of it. It's kind of a interesting square grid pattern there that we'll go ahead and use. It is, again, not the best possible out there, but just fine for a kind of simple use. So I will place this back into its plastic case and hold that. And now, again, this is a different motherboard than we used in our build, but much of the installation process and everything will be the same. So we'll slide the box out of the way and take this out of its loud, crinkly, static protection here. So here is our motherboard, right? So it's a standard motherboard size, full-size ATX. You've got memory slots, processor socket. These are PCI Express slots that you'll use to install our graphics card or other accessories that you may add later. You've got your SATA ports down here for connecting storage, and these are the external connections that you'll see out of the back of your case. So you've got PS2 if you still use that, USB 3, lots of USB ports, analog audio, Ethernet, etc., etc. Now, what you should probably go ahead and do, what I like to do is I like to use the box as kind of the building platform for this, but you want to make sure you get the rest of the accessories out. You've got your backplate here. This will actually go on the case before we install the motherboard. We've got our instruction manual, and unlike a lot of other tech products where you just kind of toss this out, you should save these because it'll have really important information about postcodes or location of jumpers or memory settings or options and stuff like that. So we'll definitely keep this handy while you're building your system. It comes with a SLI connector if you're going to use multiple graphics cards. We selected a AMD Radeon card here, so this isn't really necessary or used for any purpose. And then these are SATA cables. They actually, in this particular motherboard, they gave you 4 SATA cables to connect, optical drives or hard drives to your motherboard, so that's good. You'll definitely need those. And then these little accessories are one of my favorite kind of enhancements to the PC building process over the last 5 to 10 years, and they are basically little adapters that allow you to connect the front panel on your case, the power button, the reset button, LEDs, up close and personal where you can see all the pins and the labeling, and then they very easily slide down on the motherboard. So we'll show you how to use those in a little bit as well. So we'll set those off to the side now. Put this back inside here. And then go ahead and take our motherboard and set it on the box like that. Now, some people will do this inside the case. I like to do it outside of the case. Sometimes you want to get really close and look at things. You want to make sure you're doing everything correctly. It's just a little bit easier to do this kind of outside of all that with none of the restraints. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to install the processor. So AMD processors, unlike Intel processors today, still have the pins on the CPU itself. You'll notice the socket here has just a bunch of holes for those pins to go in. They are keyed very specifically, so the processor will only fit in one particular way. So you want to be careful about setting it down. You want to be careful about these pins on the back. They're very sensitive. You do not want to bend them. And it's easier to do than maybe I'm making it sound. So you want to kind of just grab the edges of the processor like this. You don't want to really get down and touch the pins that way. You want to grab the edges. And what you should see is, for this AMD processor, there is a yellow arrow right kind of there on the green part of the processor. And you can't see it. If you look on the above shot, you can see there's a white mark next to the CPU socket. And that those match up. Right? So that's how that processor will actually sit in there. And the installation process is really easy. There's an arm that you push off to the side and lift up, which kind of opens up the ZIF socket, which is zero insertion force, for those of you that want to know. And once the arm is up, you take the processor and you just kind of gently place it. And it should plop right down. There's no clicking sound or anything yet, but it should just sit in there really nice. And if you wiggle it around a little bit, you should kind of feel the pins inside those openings, so no problems there. And then once that's in there, you just go ahead and pull this arm back down so that it locks under that tab. Now your processor is inserted. It's really that easy, guys. No problem at all. Now the next part you want to make sure you install is the heatsink. Heatsinks are very important. If you don't have this, your system will likely not boot. We're smart enough now these days that it's not going to kill your system, but the installation process for this is also pretty simple. You'll see on the motherboard that the AMD motherboards have these kind of brackets already pre-installed. For your stock heat sinks, and a lot of heat sinks that are aftermarket, they'll actually still take advantage of these brackets on the side. If you get like a Corsair H60 or something, or any self-contained water cooling kit, it may take advantage of these. There are some coolers where you have to remove these, and in Intel platforms, it's much more common for you to have to put something on the back of the motherboard. For our situation, for our use, it's just easier this way as well for somebody who's building a PC for the first time, but we don't have to do that. So there's a power cable coming out of the back of the fan, and you simply want to make sure that your cable has enough room to get to the fan headers on the board. In particular, there's one labeled CPU fan, and you want to make sure that this has enough space to reach there. So we'll go ahead and mount it this way. And you just set the heatsink down. It'll kind of fit right in there. And then one of these arms will kind of basically comes down here and latches underneath that. And so once you do that, you should see that it's already starting to grip a little bit. And then you need to go to this side, and one of these positions is up and one of these positions is down. So you can see here that lowers the arm, and you pull it down into place here. You just got to lose a little bit of force. You'll feel it latch, but once it's latched, it's not locked. You want to actually make sure you pull this up so you hear it click, and now you can feel that it's much tighter. The processor heatsink is now mounted to the processor fairly tightly. Other heatsinks, if you decide to go non-retail, they'll have various attachment options, so make sure you pay attention to the instructions there. And then never forget to install the fan header. In this case, it goes directly behind the processor. It lines up pretty easy. You can see there's a little tab here to line it up, and there you go. If you run into any issues, you don't want this cord kind of getting in the way of the fan, so you might, tuck it in there or something like that. Anything to kind of secure it out of the way. At the end of the build, you'll see that we'll use zip ties if there's any potential issues. So there you go. That's your processors installed, your heatsinks installed. That is, step one of the process. The next thing you'll want to do is install your memory. See here we've got our memory modules. We have two because most platforms, except when you get into the higher end designs from Intel, are dual channel memory. So you want to make sure you have two DIMMs for optimal performance. And then you'll notice if you look at the DIMM slots that they alternate in color. You've got black, blue, black, blue. Those indicate different channels. Now each motherboard is going to be a little bit different. We've kind of standardized now so that if you look at the PCB, you can probably see where it will say DIMM A1, A2, B1, B2. So you kind of fill that up in the order that makes sense. We're going to put a module into A1 and B1. So A channel and B channel both have a memory module filled for the best performance. DIMMs along the bottom, these are DDR3 1600 DIMMs actually. And you'll notice that there is a notch on them. If we actually, maybe it's better to show on this, you'll see along the bottom there's a notch right here. And all you got to do is match up that notch with the DIMM slots. It kind of keeps you from putting them in backwards. And there are some locking mechanisms here, but you'll open all of these so that they're free to have memory installed. On this side, we're just kind of sliding it down into a crevice. Once you look at these up close, you'll definitely be able to tell. And you slide it into place until you hear a click, right? So it should click in place. This latch actually automatically kind of comes up and locks, and you can push it in to make sure that it is latched there. The second module we'll put into the black slot again on this, the same exact process. Line up the slots, push down until you hear that same click, and you're good to go. And then I just like to clean it up and make it even by latching those other ones as well. So that's your motherboard is now kind of prepped and ready to go. You've got your memory installed, your processor installed, your heatsink installed. Now we're ready to bring the case back up onto the table and start the next step of the process. All right, so now you've got your motherboard and processor ready and memory. It's time to bring the case back out, and the first step is to take off both sides of the doors. This Corsair 200R has some thumb screws that are pretty easy to take off. So we'll go ahead and remove all four of these. Make sure you don't lose them. Put them in your pocket. Set them someplace that you won't misplace them or drop them on shag carpet or something like that. And removing both doors just makes the whole build process easier in the long run. And then basically the last step will be to put the doors back on. So we'll go ahead and remove these here. And we'll start the installation process. Again, everybody is going to have different preferences about what order you should be doing things in. This is what we like to do here. One thing I'll point out here is that there is this brown box down here, and this is actually where Corsair stores all the accessories that you'll need, the screws, zip ties, any little things that they supply with the case are included in here. So sounds like some mounting hardware. So now we're ready to go. I will flip this case over onto its back, and when we do so, you'll see that there's quite a bit. It's quite a bit of space in here to describe. You've got this big opening. This is your back plate here. Your motherboard will mount to this back plate, right? You can kind of see that there's already some standoffs included here. Some cases, if you buy a different case, may have the standoffs in the box with the hardware that you have to put in yourself. Not a big deal. Screw them down there. You might have to have a different kind of ratchet or a pair of pliers to make sure they're tight enough in there. This big opening is if you install an aftermarket cooler or a water cooler and you need to access the back of the motherboard after it's mounted and installed. Handy feature to look for in a case. And then these openings right here that you kind of see around these cables are used for routing power cables, data cables through, help you make the case and system build a lot cleaner. So let's see what we can do here. The first step is going to be to take this motherboard and put it inside the case. Before you do that though, we need this guy. This is the backplate kind of, I don't know what we call it, shield, backplate shield. And what it does is it kind of helps you. It has labels for everything. It tells you where your USB 3.0 ports are, where your audio is, and anything like that. And again, every vendor's will be a little bit different, but they'll all fit into the same space. So what you'll do here, actually I'll go ahead and stand this back up for that, is from the inside of the case, you take this plate, and you'll see when you look in there that there is a perfectly shaped square that will fit in there. And if you push in into some of the corners, you'll feel it kind of click in and latch in. So now once you've done that, we can put the case back down and prepare to install the motherboard. The best option for installing the board, you want to be careful, you don't want to touch, it's okay to touch it, just don't have Dorito hands or something while you're doing it. With that back panel, what you'll have to do kind of is put it in at a little bit of an angle down towards that back panel, slide it in so that the ports actually go through the holes in the back of that back panel, and then slide it down flat. So let's see if we can go ahead and do that without any issue. There you go. And what you're looking for now are the holes in the motherboard to line up with the standoffs on the case already. So what this will mean is, you've got to make sure that everything is, lined up correctly. It can be hard to see, especially in the video. What you may need is a little flashlight, depending on how much light there is in the area you're working, to see that, yes, there's a screw hole underneath all or most of those holes. This particular case, the 200R, has a peg in this middle slot that is actually, you won't be able to see it very much up close, but this peg doesn't allow you to put a screw in there, but it allows you to put that through that hole on that motherboard, or on any motherboard, even micro ATX or full-size ATX, and it kind of holds it in place so that you don't have to worry about holding the motherboard in a particular location while you are attempting to screw down one or more of those openings there. So now we'll go ahead and look at the back. We'll check and make sure that everything lines up. Looks like it does. We've got access to all of our USB ports, our networking port, our audio, all that is there. Nothing's blocked, so it looks like we did that correctly. Now, next step, get into our box, and let's find the screws that actually attach the motherboard to the case. It can be a little bit confusing when you get inside here because there are tons of screws. In this case, we've got screws for mounting fans that tend to be very large threaded. We have ones that are meant for attaching the motherboard, which are finer threaded. We've got lots of these zip ties that Corsair was nice enough to include, which kind of help for cable management after the fact. And then here we've got some other screws that are even finer which I'm guessing are actually the ones to install the motherboard on there. Yeah, we'll use the finer, usually the finest thread is the best option there, but not always the case. You'll see once you try to put a screw in whether or not it is the correct one here. So let's go ahead and see if this works out or if these turn out to be the hard drive screws. So best option for using a screwdriver with this is to get one that's magnetic. It will save you a ton of headache for dropping screws. Dropping a screw behind the motherboard is a big no-no. You definitely don't want to do that, and if you do, you need to make sure that you get that screw back out, either by picking up the case and kind of moving it around to loosen it up and to have it fall out, or you're going to have to remove some components. So let's go ahead and see if these turn out to be the right screws. Yep. So you can see there, on this particular motherboard with the full-size ATX board, you'll have 3, usually 6, 9 screws. Again, with this case, because it has that one stud, you're only going to have to worry about 8 screws. But you need to install all of them. A long time ago, when I was used to doing this, you would have to put a protective washer underneath each screw that would, they said, was preventing any kind of electrical malfunctions, shorting out of the motherboard, things like that. But motherboard techniques have improved, so we don't really have to do that anymore. So we've applied all the screws into the motherboard, into the case. It's mounted there, it's firm, we're ready to go to the next step. And for me, what I like to do next is get most of the components into the case that aren't necessarily attached to the motherboard physically. So that means your hard drive, your optical drive, any SSDs, something like that. But I usually will save things like graphics cards and sound cards to the end in order to help me organize cables the best way possible without anything getting in the way. So the next step for me is going to be getting the hard drive and optical drive into the system. In this particular case, hard drives are mounted here at the bottom and your optical drives are mounted up at the top. Usually a lot of Corsair cases and a lot of cases in general now will come with hard drive sleds that will come in and out, and they'll have mounting holes for 2.5-inch drives or 3.5-inch drives. In this particular case, it doesn't have those, but it is built very well, to very easily take advantage of 3.5-inch drives, which is what we have in our build. We have a Western Digital 1 terabyte black drive, 7200 RPM. So if I go ahead and stand this up, what you can kind of see here, if we look at the back, is that this back of this is open as well. This is where our SATA data and power cables will come through so that we can take them back through these openings to the motherboard. This helps keep things clean and neat and organized. In this particular case design, it's really, really simple. You just slide the hard drive in, and there is one little retention clip here that you have to pull back. There's a little stud in there. I don't know if we can see that. There is a silver stud on this that goes into one of the mounting screw openings on the hard drive. So installation is really just sliding that in. Once you meet it, continue to push it until it goes into the appropriate screw hole. Now, this case does have 2 extra screw holes rather, that you can use to affix the hard drive in a more permanent fashion. And I would actually recommend installing them. One here and one just behind it here. And that will keep the hard drive from vibrating any, it'll keep it from making any noise, it'll keep it from affecting any of the performance issues. So I would go ahead and install those screws on your 3.5-inch hard drive that you're putting into your gaming PC. Now the next step is to install the optical drive, and that's really just as simple, except you have to remove a front panel part as well. So if you look here, these different front panels will actually come out. You simply push them from the back side, and we'll take the top one here, and just like that, you might want to save it in case you decide to reuse the case, change an optical drive, or decide not to have an optical drive, which many people are doing these days with PCs with all the downloadable media. So now you've got this opening, and you've got the capability to install your optical drive. It is also, on this 200R, a completely screwless configuration. Just like the hard drive we installed, all you have to do is take the optical drive and slide it in, and there's one clip that you need to be careful for and make sure that you pull it back as you slide it in. And then as it comes by, you hear it latch into place, and now your optical drive is mounted. And again, there are extra screw holes in here for retention, which can actually help with optical drive noise as well, these two up here. So I would recommend installing those. So now we have our motherboard, processor, memory mounted in our case. We have our optical drive, we have our hard drive mounted, and now what we're ready for is to get into some of the, maybe what might be considered the most difficult part is getting the power supply mounted, routing the cables, and making it all kind of look pretty while you do it. Some cases will still have power supply installation at the top. Most of the new ones actually mount the power supply at the bottom. Let me do that again. Some cases still have power supply mounting at the top. Most modern ones will actually have them mounted at the bottom, as this Corsair 200R does. Now, in terms of power supplies, there are a lot of different options here. This is an Antec high current gamer 620. It's a pretty good power supply, but one of the things that it does not have that I usually like is modular cables. Notice that this giant bundle of wires is going to be with you the whole time. This doesn't disconnect. Some power supplies, like the one we actually used in our build, are partially modular, which means some of the primary cables, things that you'll always need, like the 24-pin ATX power, the 8-pin ATX power for the motherboard, are permanentntly attached, maybe a couple of PCI Express cables, but then there are little openings for power supplies that you can add cables if you need them, or you don't need to keep them in your case if you don't. It's not really that big of a deal either way. It's just a matter of, is this going to be the cleanest way or to mount the power supply or not? In this case, you'll see we have plenty of room inside this design to mount this particular Antec power supply. Now, this power supply has a fan on it. You'll notice that in the case, we have an opening at the bottom that actually has a removable fan filter. So this allows you to filter the air that's coming into the system through the power supply, which is a nice feature. Now, to take advantage of that, the power supply fan that draws air in will have to be mounted upside down, just like this, and installed this way. Now, again, in this particular case, there's a little metal plate here that helps you direct where the power supply should go, making sure it doesn't interfere with the motherboard. There are standards and sizes, so you don't have to worry about messing anything like that up. And you just want to push it up against the back of the case so that it's flush. And when you do that, as I rotate this design around, you'll see that there are a number of screw holes here, kind of meant so that you can install it in either direction depending on the power supply manufacturer's fan orientation. So what we'll go ahead and do now is attach this with 4 of the larger thread screws that Corsair included, although sometimes power supply vendors will include their own as well. Now we've got the power supply mounted inside. The next step is to start to take inventory of all of these cables that are now a part of your system, which ones you'll need and which ones you won't. So you can kind of tie those off that you don't need and tuck them away and organize them. So the biggest cable you'll see out here is the ATX 24-pin connection. That goes in a very specific place on the motherboard right here, and then you have an 8-pin adapter as well that attaches to the motherboard. These are kind of the most necessary cables for getting your system up and running. You'll also have adapters for, like this, that attach to your optical drive and your hard drive or SSD. These are SATA power connectors, and they differ a little bit from what they had a decade ago or so, which was pretty much exclusively these Molex connectors. Some fans, some other add-ons and accessories may still use those, but I think for the most part we can be satisfied with just using SATA connectors. And then you also have PCI Express power connectors, and as you might guess, these are for PCI Express accessories, in particular the graphics card. So our R9 270X will actually use 2 of these, and we'll show you that process when we get to that point as well. So one thing you'll want to do, thanks to these cable openings, is route the power cables that you will need out the back here, up to the back of the case, so that you can then bring them back in where it's most appropriate to maintain a clean computing environment. So what I'm going to go ahead and do now is take these cables that I have decided that we definitely will use and feed them through the back of the case. And then for right now we can just kind of leave them loose. You want to be careful that we're not you know, bending any of the pins on the bottom of the motherboard or anything like that. Just feed them on through. Some cases will actually have rubber grommets on these openings in order to make it a little bit cleaner and a little bit neater, but that's just this $200 for the budget did not have those in there. Now, if we look at the back of the system, you'll see that what we have done is we fed these cables out the back, but there's also this other bundle. This bundle is what we'll deal with next. These are part of the case. You have your front panel connections for audio, your LED lights, USB 3.0 connections for front panel as well. So let's go ahead and push these through, keep them bundled together so they stay nice and neat, and then we'll just kind of move them off to the side for right now. We're going to deal with that in the next step. Let's attach the ATX power connector, right? So what you want to do is find a location on on the case rather, that kind of closely matches up with where the ATX power connector is. So here's the ATX power connector, here's the closest opening. So if you can, what you want to do is you want to take your power cable and feed it through that opening. And now you can see there is a pin you have to match up. There's a locking pin on the front of this cable, and then there's a place where that pin latches up right here. And it's really just as simple as matching up the pins, pushing in. Now you have to use a little bit more force than you might think is necessary to push those in, but you want to make sure you feel it lock into place, and if you tug on it a little bit, that cable's not going to come out. Great, your first power cable's up and connected. Your next one is going to be this 8-pin power connector. Most of us around the PC Perspective offices will tell you that this is our least favorite power cable because of its usual location on a motherboard and how difficult it is to actually install. For this particular motherboard, it is way up in, let's see if I can move that up here, it's way up top here. It's actually above this blue heatsink. It's this little blue connector right there. And I think we'll be able to slide this ATX, yep, that worked out pretty well. So now you can see we've got this, our 8-pin power connector, which is actually kind of split into 2 4s, directly above where the actual connector is on the board. So we kind of have to twist it a little bit to get it into the shape it needs to be in. And make sure all the openings line up again. Push in place till it locks, and there you go. Now you have your primary ATX power connections for the motherboard from the power supply connected. They're routed very well. You can tell that we've already got power to the board and it's not messy inside, so that's a plus. Next thing I'll do is install the power for the hard drive and optical drive. So again, because of the way we mounted the optical drive and hard drive on the back of the case, it's pretty easy to get to. So here's our SATA power cable, and here you can see our hard drive is mounted here, and our hard drive is mounted here, and our optical drive is actually mounted back there. So installing these power cables is really pretty simple, and we'll have a couple of different options in installing it like that. That's part of your result there. Now, as it turns out, this cable is not going to work for also reaching to the optical drive. It doesn't look like in any configuration, whether or not we use the first in the series or the last in the series for it, that will work out. So what you'll have to do is you have to actually use one of the other cables that we had kind of left bundled up. So let's go ahead and make sure our hard drive cable is connected, and then we'll look to the front here and see what other cables we have. Some power supplies will have different cable retention mechanisms for this, and this is again one of the benefits of modular, either fully modular or partially modular designs, that they let you kind of pick and choose what you want. So what I did was I found another SATA power cable here, and I will go ahead and rebundle up the Molex connectors that we are not going to be using on this system. It keeps things neat and clean. All right, that wasn't too bad. So now what we'll do is we'll take this cable, we'll feed it back through that same opening. No, actually, we'll feed it back through the same opening. And this might seem a little bit roundabout way to do it. We'll feed it through all the way to the back here. And then we'll actually take it back inside the case up top. And what that allows us to do is get to the optical drive without creating a lot of cable clutter inside the design. So if you look here now, we can simply line up the power cable. Make sure you note that there is an L shape to this power connector. It's not perfectly flat. So match that up with the Blu-ray drive that we have installed, and there you go. Now we have, pull some of the excess of that back out so it'll be easier to clean and get to. And there you go. So now we have everything powered except for the graphics card because it's not installed yet. And we are ready to move on to the next step, which is going to be installing the front panel connectors and the front panel USB. Now, dealing with this bunch of cables from your case can be pretty intimidating. There's a lot of kind of loosely bundled wires, and they all have odd names on them, like HDD, LED, and power SW, which you could probably guess is the power switch. So go ahead and remove that twist tie, but you might want to save it because you never know if you're going to want to use it again to clean all this back up. So let's separate these a little bit and see what we get. So these very thin wires are your front panel connectors for, as you can see here, we have power switch, we have the hard drive LED, we have the reset switch, and we have the power LED positive and negative. So those are here, and what we'll do with that is, remember those little adapters that I mentioned at the beginning when we unboxed our motherboard, this little white square. Now what you used to have to do back in the old day was get down really close to the motherboard and look at all these pinouts, and they were different on every board vendor, and sometimes they weren't labeled very well, and sometimes you had to use in manuals to match up. But now you have this really cool thing where all of this is labeled very well for power, LEDs, reset, all that good stuff, and you just attach these cables to it. So what we'll do is we'll take the hard drive LED and attach that. We'll take the reset switch and attach that. We will take the power switch and attach that, and simply slide them on over the pins. Now the power LED is a little bit different because they're separated. You've got positive and negative, but again it's labeled on here power LED negative and power LED positive. So the only one that we did not install anything on was the speaker, which is a legacy feature that nobody really uses anymore. So now what you do is you take this block that has a very fixed form on it. You look at the pinout on the back and you can kind of make sure that it matches the layout of the pins as you're going to install it. And you can see that all you have to do is put that whole block on there like that, and boom, all of your front panel connections are ready to go. You still got a little bit of cable clutter we'll deal with in a second. Now the other two cables attached in this bundle are, this one is labeled HD audio, and this is for your front panel audio connections, your headphone and mic jacks up front. If you want to use those, we'll hook that up. And then this one is labeled USB 3.0, and again, that's for the front panel headers. So you have easy access to USB 3 ports on the front of your case. So to install both of these, the USB 3 one's actually pretty easy. On the motherboard, in the manual, you can make sure you're looking at the right place, but there's this blue little header, and it's actually labeled USB 3. And it's meant for extra USB 3 connections besides the one on the back of the case. And the connector is keyed, so it'll only install in one direction. And we simply push that into the opening like so. And again, now you've got your USB 3 connected. We've got a little bit of cable clutter. We'll deal with that. And then for the HD audio, there's another header on the motherboard that will be labeled audio. And once you find that, again, this is keyed so that it will only install in one form. And there it is. On this particular motherboard, it's called AAFP. So we'll go ahead and install that header like so. So now we've got everything connected. And if you want to, you can either use this twist tie that was originally on the case, or you can use one of these zip ties that Corsair included with it, and just kind of attempt to, in the best, easiest way possible, kind of bundle things up so that they're out of the way. You might be able to like feed them behind the case or anything like that. This way, we'll just kind of bundle this up a little bit so that it's easier for us right now. And once you have everything absolutely installed, that's when you can kind of go through and do your cable management and perfect anything that you might want to. So there's that. Now we're installed. We're good to go. The next step is to, I think, install the data cables from the hard drive and the optical drive onto the motherboard. Now we have these sitting here. The motherboard, again, came with some. And you'll notice that there are two different connectors on them. On one end of both is a straight connector, and the other end is a right angle connector. And this is a nice addition, a nice improvement in the way things used to work, as what it allows you to do is, as you connect it to the back of your optical drive, it only fits one way. The right angle makes it so it's very clean cable installation. Now for the best look and for the, the cleanest organization, I feed it back into the back of the case, and then you'll see the SATA ports. They're right here on the motherboard. They're actually, the connections are facing away from the board. Some of the motherboards, the SATA connections will face up, kind of like this one does, but I like it when they face off to the side. It just makes installations a little bit easier. Notice on this board that there are some blue ports and there are some white ports. Now the blue ports are labeled SATA 6G E1 and 2, and then these are SATA 6G 3 and 4 and 5 and 6. Now what that will indicate is different depending on your motherboard. It could mean that they're running off different chipsets, different controllers. Check your motherboard to make sure. I'm going to go ahead and install this into one of the white ports, as I think that will provide the best compatibility for that optical drive on the chipset. So the next cable we'll use here is for the hard drive, which is down here. I'll go ahead and first feed it through to get a connection to the SATA port. Again, it's really simple, just locks in. And then what we do is, if we look at the back, you'll see we have our SATA cable out here like this, and we attach it to the hard drive like so. Not the cleanest option there. Again, cable routing kind of all happens at the end, but as you can kind of see, you kind of tuck things in and it starts to look pretty neat already. So that is our front panel headers. That's our SATA data cables. All that's really left is we have these two fans on the case. We have one in the back and one in the front that we need to connect, and then we need to attach our graphics card and power it, and that will be all for the hardware installation side. All right, to install and power these accessory fans, you've got one here in the front that is going to help bring cool air in from the front of the case, pass it through all of your components, help keep everything cool, and then one that's going to exhaust it out. So I went ahead and took the twist ties off these cables, and the headers on them are pretty simple. They're simple 3-pin connections, and you can basically install them in any fan header on the motherboard that isn't already in use. In our case, this motherboard has one that says CHA_fan3, which is chassis fan 3. So what I'll go ahead and do is install that. Even though this is a 3-pin header and that's a 4-pin connection, you can install it on the 3 pins that's keyed, so it'll only install one direction. And then what you should do is make sure you get this fan cable out of the way some. We'll include it with our bundle of front panel header options, so it doesn't interfere with the fan blades. And then on the back here, we'll do the same thing. We've got this cable. We found chassis fan 1 and chassis fan 2 connections. Go ahead and attach it to chassis fan 1 and I would probably reuse the zip tie there to make sure that that didn't interfere with the fan, but we can kind of tuck it away for now. So now we've got our chassis fan is installed. The next and last step for our hardware build is to install the graphics card. And here we have it here. This was our reference R9 270X. If you go on the build specs that we use, it'll be a slightly different look, but it's a retail card. And this is going to go into these PCI Express slots that you see here. There are a whole bunch of them. We've got 4 of them available, but the one you want to use is the one closest to the top. This one here is the primary PCI Express slot. That's the one we're going to actually install it in. To get it in there, you need to remove a couple of these back panel covers. And what this does is allows room for the connections on the graphics card to poke out and be accessible on the back of the case. So we'll go ahead and remove these 2. There are thumb screws, but sometimes they can be a little bit hard to get to, so they have standard Phillips tops on them. So we'll go ahead and take those out. And once you take the screws out, you'll actually go ahead and remove these back plates like this. They're just kind of extra, but again, I would hold on to them, keep them in a box with the rest of your stuff. I like to use the motherboard box as the place to keep all those goods in case you ever need to replace anything, send anything back for warranties, etc. So now installation of the graphics card is pretty simple. You're going to line it up with the the PCI Express slot in question and make sure that you took out the right back panels over here, and make sure there's nothing underneath the video card. But once you line it up, it should kind of fit into place, and then you push it down till you feel a click. There you go. So we felt it click, and if everything was right, if you tug on it a little bit, it's not going to slide right out. But now that you've got that installed, we need to put those screws back so that it's completely safe and retained inside the system, and you don't have any issues with wiggle or PCI Express slots not matching up. So I mean, it's really just that simple. This motherboard, and I think a lot of motherboards in this form factor, will support multiple graphics cards. If you want to do that, you know, check your motherboard for the best layout, but you've got 3 other PCI Express slots that they could fit in, and there's obviously one that's going to be the best option for that. Multi-GPU is a more advanced option for PC gamers, but I think once you figure out what you're doing, it won't take very long until you're going to want to install a second GPU anyway. So we're almost completely finished. You'll notice here that there are 2 connections for PCI Express power, 2 6-pin connections. Every video card is going to be a little bit different. This particular GPU requires 2 6-pin connections. If you remember in the back, I actually pulled out these 2 PCI Express adapters right here. So what I'm going to do is match up where I think they should come through, and let's go ahead and filter those back into the main area of the case. Go ahead and slide them through some. Flip it back on its side. And 6 pins. You notice that this connector actually has an extra 2 pins off to the side. Some higher end graphics cards will require 8-pin connectors, which you just would then push together. For this graphics card, it requires 6-pin, so we don't need that kind of extra bit of power. Just latch it on there. It doesn't matter which one goes into which port. Push it until it locks. And again, we'll do that here as well. Push it until it locks. And it looks like I just noticed that the USB 3.0 header came off while we were pushing those through, so make sure you get that back into place. There you go. So now we have all of the hardware installed in the case. We're ready to power it up, install our operating system, start installing our games. You can put the doors back on it if you want. I tend to like to leave the doors off of it just so I can make sure the CPU fan is spinning, make sure the fans that are supposed to be spinning are moving and everything is working in order. The graphics card fan, all that stuff is good to make sure that it's functioning correctly. But that's all it took, right? You saw us build this system in real time for putting together a gaming rig that I think most people are going to be really, really impressed by.